Salt Lake City 2034, the past, present, and future. Today, we look at Salt Lake City's past Olympic Games in 2002, our present state of readiness, and the impact on Utah's future. Our hosts this hour are Jeff Caplan and Debbie Dujanovic.
To many Utahns, they're a cherished memory. To those who arrived here since 2002, they're a mystery. Either way, they're coming back. The Winter Olympics have officially been awarded to Salt Lake City for 2034. It's going to take 10 years to get ready, and at KSL NewsRadio, we'll take you on a trip from the past to the present effort to win the Games and to the future with a glimpse at what the Olympics will do to and do for Utah. I'm Jeff Caplan. With me in the studio, Debbie Dujanovic, and I'm going to venture a guess at this effort to win the 2034 Games just brings back a slew of memories.
It does. I started covering the build-up to the 2002 Winter Games back in 1991 when I was a television news reporter, and I remember the anticipation then. I thought the 2002 Games would never get here, Jeff, and guess what? They're so far in the rearview mirror, and now we're staring down the road at another major Olympics event being held here in 2034.
There are so many people who've talked to me about what they experienced in 2002, whether they were at Medals Plaza or part of a cheer team, and they've grown up since, and they're looking forward to their kids and grandkids being involved next time.
I have three distinct memories that I want to share with you from 2002. And I want to start with something I don't think we talk enough about, and that was the impact of the torch run. So the torch is lit in Olympia, Greece, and then it makes its way over, it's like by car, by bus, by boat, and it's, handheld from Olympia, Greece, all the way to Salt Lake City, Utah. There's these torch runs through, I think it went through 46 states across the country. And then I had the amazing opportunity, Jeff, of being at Delicate Arch in the Moab area in Arches National Park when it came through at sunrise. And one early February morning as it was making its way into Salt Lake City.
I'm getting chills as you describe this. Were there a lot of people there?
Tons. It made its way through the streets of Moab, and people were literally everywhere. And this is what happened all over Utah. So let me take you back to 2002. Shelley Osterloh with KSL 5 Television was reporting from Cedar City during the torch run.
The flags are hung, the venues are built, the snow is on the ground, the sky is blue. It's game time, and we will light the flame within.
A packed stadium of about 16,000 people welcomed the torch at 8:30 this morning in Cedar City. School children sang songs, and students waved flags from countries participating in the 2002 Winter Games. At the center of it all, firefighters and police officers helping hold a giant American flag.
Your Olympic torch is on the way.
The flame continued north on I-15 to Parowan, the home of Utah's first Olympian, Alma Richards. One of Alma's cousins, Carol Wright, took the flame for what she says was the highlight of her 93-year life.
It's just absolutely wonderful. The support of the town is just marvelous.
An estimated 10,000 people from all around Sevier County packed downtown Richfield just after noon to get a glimpse of the flame.
Wow. That's incredible. This is not for a sporting event. This is just to see the torch.
And it was in just one place, and the torch made its way all over Utah. People were running with the torch. They had signed up to be a torch runner, and people were pouring into the streets to cheer it on. And I remember taking my very young children at the time to one of the routes in Sandy, Utah. It was basically the last day of the torch run. It was making its way to Rice Eccles Stadium, and I'm getting emotional, where it was going to be lit. And my kids were I think one of my youngest was a toddler. And it was just a moment to remember. And don't forget, Jeff, that this was just a few months after 9/11, terrorist attacks in New York City, and of course the Pentagon. And this was a moment that was so breathtaking and gave us so much hope.
I was so far, far away in New York, and there we were all wondering, how are they ever going to do Olympics after what just happened here? We thought they were going to be canceled.
I think we thought they were going to be canceled too. We'll talk more about that straight ahead in just a moment. I want to also give a huge shout out because I think the reason the Olympics were so successful here and so memorable in such a positive way for so many, because we had so many volunteers. We had 68,000 people sign up to volunteer for the Olympics, to help greet people, direct people. The reality was we needed about 25,000 or 26,000 people to make that happen. So we had way more volunteers. The Utah volunteer spirit was alive and well during the Olympics. A lot of people still have those yellow jackets that they were wearing during the Olympics. And that really was a special moment, I think, where we really shined on the world stage.
You know, we got to the Olympics after this torch run. Everybody was on point. It was time to get going in the opening ceremonies. But before that, it was a torturous route to the Olympic Games. There were problems along the way.
There were quite a few problems along the way. We had the Olympic bid scandal. We'll get more into that in a little bit. You and I can talk about that. We then had 9/11 hit. We were worried about whether we were going to be able to pull off the games. We also had something that doesn't get talked about a lot either, which was the anthrax scare. We had anthrax letters just before the Olympics going out across the United States. That became a real problem for the Olympics. But I want to point out that a lot of people had a lot of fun. It was very, very memorable. And in fact, people were so worried about ticket prices back then, Jeff, but there was this really great opportunity that was set up on Main Street in downtown Salt Lake City. It was called a ticket exchange, where anybody who wanted to sell their tickets at the last minute was able to go through just a background check, and it made so people who were buying tickets at the last minute weren't getting ripped off.
Wait, background check?
Yeah, a little background check on the person selling the ticket to make sure that the person who was selling it wasn't going to rip off the person who was buying it. Tickets were going for as inexpensive as $20 a ticket for some pretty exciting Olympic events. In fact, I went to Main Street to talk to people who were buying and selling tickets at this ticket exchange.
With 7 days left in Olympic competition, tickets are going for as little as $20. But the more popular events will cost you a lot more than that. $20 has landed some spectators at ski competitions in Park City. Buyers are paying more than face value, though, for figure skating events and hockey tickets, some as high as $1,000 a piece. The true fan seems willing to pay.
Oh, really psyched up. Really psyched up. USA.
The city set up the ticket exchange to keep tabs on the brokers and make one-stop ticket shopping possible. But it's up to you to cut your own Olympic ticket deal. Debbie Dujanovic, eyewitness to the games.
Oh, you sound so young.
That was 22 years ago. I was in my 30s, covering. But I think the hopeful thing is, as we look forward to the 2034 games, is that not all tickets were outrageously priced. A family of 5 could get into an Olympic event for about $100.
Now, as I recall, this is just watching on TV from afar, at Metals Plaza, NSYNC performed. It was real impromptu. They were just wearing their Roots winter coats.
I saw Martina
singing.
McBride. She performed at the concert at a Metals event as well. So, they were bringing in rock stars and country stars to perform. You could walk around the corner in downtown Salt Lake City and just randomly see a band performing. There was a special spark about the 2002 games that I hope we carry, and I know we're going to carry into 2034.
You know, you mentioned walking around Salt Lake City. As I recall, I've heard over the years from so many people that security was so nails tough downtown that you really couldn't go anywhere. Cars couldn't go here and there. How difficult was it?
It was tricky. It was tricky, but it wasn't impossible. And in fact, let's talk about that next.
Salt Lake City 2034 on KSL NewsRadio.
We're looking forward to the Winter Olympic Games of 2034. In this hour, we're looking back at 2002. Olympic Games held under trying circumstances, supported by a dedicated community of hundreds of thousands. Games so good, they're coming back. We're back, Jeff Caplan and Debbie Dujanovic.
Hi, Jeff. When we think about the 2002 games, we can't help but talk about 9/11. Of course, 9/11 happens just months before we're set to host the World here in Salt Lake City. And we all remember, if we were alive or if we've heard from our parents, what 9/11 was all about.
There was a lot of people hurt. They were lying on the floors, coming down the stairs. A lot of people had asthma attacks while they were coming down. It was bad.
Everybody was screaming. Everybody was running. The cops were trying to maintain the calm. And in that haste, people were stampeding. People started screaming that there was another plane coming. I didn't see the plane, but I turned around and the second building just exploded.
It was right after 9/11 that we all had to think about what about the 2002 Winter Olympics. Will Salt Lake City be able to secure the Olympic Games in such a way to avoid a terrorist attack with the world and the athletes converging on Utah? Jay Evenson, currently the opinion editor of the Deseret News. Hi, Jay.
Hi.
You were also a young reporter back in 2002. I continue to call myself that. It's been a lot of years, but covering the games was one of the best experiences of my career, and I know it was of yours as well. And you have to think about the impact of 9/11 on our security during the games. It had a huge impact. And also, I think we often forget about the anthrax letters that were circulating around the country as well just before the games.
There were so many things going on. And so if you go back to November of 2001, so we've had 9/11, not even 2 months earlier. We launched the war in Afghanistan in October. So bombs are flying. And then, yes, we have the anthrax. And it was about that time that I heard that the National Conference of Editorial Writers, of which I was a member, was going to hold a briefing at the State Department in Washington, D.C. And I thought, I've got to be there. So I flew back. This was only days after the anthrax scare, so you can imagine what security was like at that time. And Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State at the time, came in and met with us. And there were a lot of people calling for canceling the games. And there were other people. The head of the International Olympic Committee was calling for a truce, a ceasefire for the games, which the United States wasn't interested in doing. So there were all these questions that were swirling. So I asked General Powell what he thought about that. Well, first thing he did was give me a little lecture about the history of Olympic truces, which he said were always designed to protect the athletes. So the athletes could travel freely, but the bombs would still be flying. Which wasn't much comfort. But then I asked him, well, should we cancel the games? And he told me, he said, I think it's important for it to go ahead, just like it was important for the World Series to go ahead. And if you remember in October, we'd had just a great World Series with Arizona and the New York Yankees. And it had been a time of sort of coming together for the country and getting us to take our minds off things for a while. And I remember leaving that meeting thinking, yeah, I guess we're going to do this after all.
And that was the first time that we had metal detectors in New York at a stadium because the Yankees were in that World Series. President Bush was going to be throwing out the first pitch, as we remember. Through a strike, the crowd went crazy, but they couldn't bring bags into Yankee Stadium, and it was like that. And I'm sure in Salt Lake City they were wondering, is this what our Olympic Games are going to be like?
Yes, and I mean, what bigger target for a terrorist organization than the Olympics, right? Because you can not only attack the United States, but virtually every country that's participating in those games. There were some real and serious worries about what kind of security we were going to have to do in order to protect ourselves.
And we immediately jumped into action to tighten up security and make sure we were bringing in federal resources to help secure the games. And I want to go back just for a moment to just the number of security hurdles, Jay, that are, you're reminding us of that we had to get over. Not only did we have to be concerned about a terrorist attack from the sky, but you talk about, the anthrax letter. I mean, anthrax is a very deadly biological substance that was showing up in letters and mail. And I think that also became a concern. Like, was that going to somehow, get to the athletes or get into the venues? And of course, we didn't have any of that happen, at least nothing that we're aware of. And the stakes just became so high so quickly.
Huge stakes, and this is a type of event where there's not like a central location, like one stadium where everything is confined to. You have venues all over the valley and up in the mountains, and each one of them has to have its own security and security perimeter. But we did it without incident, and people were so friendly and so interested in just having a good time and being nice to one another, which is what I remembered. After a while, we knew the threat was there, but it just didn't seem like anything bad was going to happen.
From afar, again, the question, how did Salt Lake and Utah know how to handle this? You had never hosted an event of this magnitude before, ever. Suddenly, this layer of complexity, security at the granular level had to keep everybody safe from all around the world coming here. How did they manage to pull it off?
Well, it wasn't just local officials. There were federal officials who were here doing it as well. And when you were in downtown, it did look like sort of a semi-war zone. There were people with guns walking around, guards. There were fences and perimeters and that type of a thing. Very difficult to get there. And I think in a lot of ways, just the visual, right, of all that was sort of a feeling of security for people who were there, to know that there was that kind of a presence, and maybe a deterrent as well.
Jay and Jeff, I want to add this. I said at the beginning of this that I began covering the Olympics in 91 for 2002. The amount of pre-planning that went in, whether it was reconstructing I-15 to make it more drivable, whether it was adding options for commuting in and out of the city, really did make it so we were able to, and it was hard, I'm sure it was not an easy lift, to jump into action when we needed to add these layers of security. There was so much pre-planning that went into the Olympics, as it should be, that I felt like we were in a position to pivot when we needed to pivot.
I think that's right. If you lived here back then, you remember the jokes about the I-15 luge run, because we were expanding the freeway, and for a while it was just concrete barriers on both sides and 2 lanes and just go as fast as you can. But you're absolutely right. We had gone through all that, and there was a tremendous amount of planning that went into it.
Jay Evenson, opinion editor of the Deseret News, thank you so much for taking us back to those times, and your trip to meet Colin Powell. That's very amazing.
It was. Thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Next, let's talk more specifics about that pivot that we've been talking about to beef up security for the 2002 Winter Olympics right after 9/11.
Salt Lake City 2034, the past, present, and future. A special 3-hour documentary on KSL NewsRadio.
Jeff Caplan, Debbie Dujanovic here. I talked to many Utahns who were around in 2002, and they talk about the volunteering at the Olympics, their kids on a cheer squad, or appearing at the opening ceremonies holding flags, or even tickets they bought to the games. Debbie has been talking about seeing events in 2002 with her kids. Debbie, you were working in TV news here during the games, right?
At KSL 5 television, I was. And you were on 9/11 back in New York, right?
Yeah, working at CBS. It was a time.
It was a time. And, as the planes were hitting the towers, just time stopped. It seemed like the world stopped, planes stopped flying, and then within a few days, we started to become concerned about what would become of the 2002 Winter Games. I remember President Bush at the time saying this.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and I've ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation.
The full resources of the federal government also had to turn its attention towards this major event that we were hosting as a nation for the world to show up in Salt Lake City, Utah in February of 2002, just a few months after 9/11, Jeff.
I've talked extensively about 9/11, but I do want to mention that afterward, every city in America thought, wait a minute, could we be the next target because we have this military base, these casinos in Las Vegas, and everybody wanted protection and wanted to be on alert. But after the dust has settled, after the anthrax letters were dealt with, everybody in Washington started wondering, what do we do with these Olympic Games?
Chris Bertram, retired chief of police with the Unified Police Department here in Salt Lake County, and also formerly my husband. Hi, Chris.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us for this important discussion as we look back on 2002. In fact, I remember the day that I called you on September 11th. I was out on a morning live shot for KSL 5 television. You were asleep in bed because you had worked an overnight shift, and I said, turn on the television. I don't know what's happening to the world. And you told me, and it's almost a direct quote, when will it stop? Because it was just one plane after the other. And then almost immediately, I think you and I both realized the gravity of how this could impact the Olympic Games. And you were involved in the middle of the renewed security planning.
I was. Yeah, I actually had consulted a little bit with regards to the changeover. Prior to 9/11, there'd been a push for more a security-centric presence, and after 9/11, it became more of a public safety law enforcement-centric.
So explain what you mean. Like, what would have looked like if we would have stuck with the original plan, and then compare it, Chris, to the plan we had to go with?
You would have seen probably about half to maybe 60% less law enforcement presence and more of a security presence, meaning that, it wouldn't have been, our venues would not have been as secure with the military, state, federal, local law enforcement securing those. You would have seen it would have been softer. You would have been able to move spectators into the venues quicker because there would have been less screening. Magnetometers would have been turned down less. Bags would have been quickly, gone through, and the more of a security to get the people into the venue so they could watch the events. After 9/11, completely changed. We were protecting the world as they came to Utah for this huge event, international event.
When was the decision made that the games were going to happen? Because there were questions back in D.C. about whether we should go through with this event. How long did it take before they gave the thumbs up?
It was fairly quickly. I think what was more importantly was this decision to change over, because we'd been planning for the games. Law enforcement had been involved. Retired law enforcement had been picked up by the Olympic Command, the Public Safety Olympic Command. They'd been working on this for 3 or 4 years, full time. And all of a sudden it turned and it changed. And that was a big step. And we knew that was going to be more of if this games are going to go, we're going to have to change, and we're going to have to put a lot more resources into than we thought. And so I think that was the decision finally that the games would move forward, I think was a little bit off. However, the security planning immediately changed to say, if it happens, now what does it look like?
Chris, walk us through what it looked like. And if I recall, you were pretty much living at the Kearns Olympic Oval back then. Is my memory serve?
It was full time for several weeks.
I remember how little we saw each other as I was reporting, and you were out there, and it was just a really, really busy time. Walk us through what it was like for spectators who had bought tickets to go watch the speed skating out there, and like Apollo Antonono and all of the speed skating greats out there. What was it like getting into the venue for them?
I think it was a change. We remember what happened after 9/11 at the airport. It was at that time even more than what we were, facing at the airport. It was slow. the distances that you parked and walked because of, the footprint of the venue, you were forced to park away from it so we could keep it safe. As you came in, you were screened, several times before you even got into the venue. And so I think it was unusual. However, I think we did an excellent job. I don't think people missed venue start times because those were hard starts. But I think that, it was, you knew that you were coming into a venue that was completely, utterly safe.
On the fly in 2002, you had to create this security system for all the marbles, really. And so it was slow. It was frustrating for a lot of people, from what I've heard. For 2034, will we be efficient and it will be seamless and computers will handle all of it?
It was interesting because, and Debbie knows this, after the Olympics, I went on to get a master's degree at the Naval Postgraduate School. My thesis was on the collaboration of public safety at the Olympics and how we were successful. And I think, Jeff, one of the things that's going to be telling is as we approach the Olympics, especially within the year or two, what is the international threat? Is that changing? Is there actionable threats against the games? Because, utmost importance, and we were told this before and after, the games have to be a success. We can't have any problems. There was a lot of resources put into that. And so I think as we get closer to that, you're right, 10 years from now, technology is going to be very helpful. We see that, at the airport, that if, you're vetted, you go through the TSA security a lot faster than those that haven't been previously vetted. I think things like that will definitely help, and they'll be in place. And technology will probably help us get people in faster, but I think it will be better. I would hope it'd be better with transportation and with getting into venues. I hope we're going to put on another great games, I believe.
We're all going to take our flying cars to the games, right?
Chris, thank you. Chris Bertram, retired chief of police with the Unified Police Department. He was in the Holiday Precinct, and he was also part of the security detail that led a successful 2002 Winter Olympic Games. Thank you so much for joining us and taking us back in time of what it looked like then and then predicting what it might look like in 2034. Straight ahead, there was a reason why Mitt Romney was chosen to be the head of the 2002 Winter Olympic Games. Lisa Riley Roche of the Deseret News to talk about that.
Salt Lake City 2034 on KSL NewsRadio.
We're back, Jeff Caplan and Debbie Dujanovic. And the last time Utah hosted the Olympics, things did not start well.
Now let's remember, Utah was awarded the 2002 Winter Olympic Games all the way back in 1995. And by 1998, news headlines were laced with allegations of bribery involving two top Salt Lake City Winter Olympic organizers. And at some point, the organizing committee reaches out and hires Mitt Romney to turn things around. Lisa Riley Roche of the Deseret News joins me now to walk us back in time to, we had a scandal, Lisa, here in Salt Lake City, and then we have, 9/11 hit. There were all kinds of hurdles to pulling off a successful Winter Olympics, and you've been covering the Olympics for the Deseret News for decades now.
That's right. Ever since we originally bid for the 1998 Winter Games that went to Nagano, Japan.
You were in Budapest when we were awarded the Games in 1995, right?
I was.
Super exciting.
It was a great moment for the state. Everyone was very excited, and everything looked really good for a long time until, of course, the scandal hit.
The scandal hit, but we survived that scandal, and we went on to put on really, really awesome games, very, very successful games. Talk about Mitt Romney and his role, and then bring us through to when 9/11 hit and the conversations that were going on behind the scenes as you were covering the questions, would we be able to host a 2002 Winter Olympics just a few short months after 9/11?
Well, Mitt Romney, of course, was brought in from Massachusetts, where he was a very successful businessman, to run the Olympics. He had a background connected to Utah as a BYU student and had been recruited by Utah's governor at the time, Mike Leavitt, and other Utah leaders to restore confidence in the games. Because remember, in the United States, the games are funded privately. That means selling sponsorships to corporations. That means broadcast rights. That means donations. That means ticket sales. Those things were put in jeopardy by the impact of the bribery scandal. And so they recognized a need for new leadership here in Utah and, again, recruited Mitt Romney to take over the games, which he did in early 1999. And within a few weeks of 9/11 hitting, he and his top officials at the organizing committee were pretty confident that they had brought things back into place financially for a successful games. And then in 2001, on September 11th, everything changed.
Everything changed. I want you to take us into that moment, because I felt like, and this is just how I felt as a reporter for KSL 5 TV, and of course, you were much more intimately involved as a reporter for the Deseret News and the details of what was going on behind the scenes than I was. But I felt as though once, the allegations had surfaced, we'd kind of gotten through that as a community. I thought, okay, we've crossed that hurdle. What else could possibly happen now? And then the worst, 9/11.
Right.
And Mitt Romney is now at the head of, the organizing efforts, and we are just 5 short months away from the games. That had to be a moment. Well, I want you to take us inside, but for me, I'm looking at that thinking they must have wondered if they could pull this off safely.
Well, there were a lot of concerns about safety, of course, but from the moment 9/11 happened, I think that the commitment was there to carry on with the games as a way to bring the world back together after such a horrific attack on our country. That day, September 11th, Mitt Romney was in Washington lobbying, ironically, you could say, for more security funding for the Olympics. The federal government in the United States covers security funding for major events like the Super Bowl and, of course, the Olympics. But that has to be secured through Congress. And so Mitt Romney was back in Washington lobbying for more money and ended up in a car with the organizing committee's government affairs director heading out to Virginia to get away from the attacks. And we're actually driving by a smoky, burning Pentagon building when I was able to reach Mitt Romney on the phone to find out, number one, was he safe, right? Because none of us knew who had been affected by the attack for some time. Cell phone coverage was down in a lot of places. It was difficult to reach people. The organizing committee also had their top communications person in New York City preparing for a torch relay event. There was going to be a big media event down in the Battery Park area, which, of course, was where the towers were that were hit and destroyed in the attack. So it was a very intense day for the Olympic Organizing Committee here. I reached out to Mitt Romney, of course, and others, as well as International Olympic Committee officials. And to a person, I think everybody wanted to figure out a way to go forward. But to do that, they had to convince the world that it would be safe to come here. And there was a lot of effort in those months months between the attack and the start of the games in February 2002 to make sure that was going to be the case. I think those of us who were here in 2002 remember the fighter jet flyovers during the days of the Olympics. We remember the intense security, soldiers in uniform carrying weapons, being positioned outside major venues to ensure everyone felt safe and comfortable.
I felt like the 2002 Winter Olympic Games were a success, and they were a lot of fun, and there was a great vibe in our community. How did you feel after covering the games?
I think that's pretty universal for any of us who were there during the games, right? And a lot of that was the effect of this being the first major international event after 9/11. It really did bring everyone together from around the world, right here in our own backyard, to trade pins on the street, just to walk around and hear all the different languages being spoken by all the international visitors here. And of course, many of our fellow Utahns speak foreign languages, and we're able to have conversations with people from overseas. It was just a really healing time, I think, for a lot of people, and a time to put aside a lot of the anxiety that we had all felt after 9/11 and just enjoy being together and celebrating sport and achievements and just the ability to be together peacefully. It was a terrific time, I think, for Utah.
Yeah, and I think if you felt like I did, it went too fast. It just went too fast. It was such a great time to be a Utahn. Lisa Riley Roche of the Deseret News. Lisa covers not only Olympics, but also politics. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, Lisa.
Thank you.
Stay here. Maria Chaleos joins me next hour with a look at how Utah made the magic happen again. We'll be back.